piece of land of his own, and he didn't have money enough to buy it, and he was trying to homestead, you see.
Uh-huh.
And he did homestead in Kansas, where we were at.
Yeah.
But I don't know about Nebraska, whether he homesteaded there. But they did have 40 acres of ground there.
How long did you farm then around Salem?
Well, until 19... You mean my folks?
No, with your husband, with Grandpa.
We went to Chamberlain in the spring of 1919.
Why?
And bought a place.
Well, did you move there just because you could buy a place there, or was?
Yes, I think so.
I see.
You know, it's hard to rent places, and especially where there's relatives that might rent the place you're on.
Yeah, yeah.
So
were there a lot of people looking for farmland up there then in 1919?
Oh yes, the younger generation, you know,
see.
would be looking for another place to. Now these horses, they moved to Philip, South Dakota. This Sis and Johnny, they live out at Philip, South Dakota. Their family moved out there, and they had their farm a long, long time. The horses had. But Orrin had went to Minnesota to look for land, but didn't find anything up there that he wanted. As much quack grass, if you know what that is.
No, what was that?
Well, that's something that has terrible roots that go right through your potatoes and things like that. It's hard to get rid of. So he went to Chamberlain. There was a family by the name of Krebs, Catholic family, that lived at Salem, and they had gone out to, I should say, Pequanna, because that was our town first. That's where Orrin shipped to, went to Pequanna. And that is, he shipped a carload of things. But he and a neighbor boy drove out with the horses, and they had some calves in the wagon. And, well, it was just after Chuck was born, and he was born in February. And as soon as Orrin knew that I was all right, then he and this boy went. And we'd had an awful lot of snow, and this was melting at this time. There was just pools of water in the Merritt yard when they left. But before they got out to Pequanna, they run into lots and lots of snow. It was hard for them to get through. But they went to this Henry Krebs's home, and then where Orrin had bought wasn't very far from Henry Krebs's. But Mr. Krebs had seen that Orrin could find a place to buy hay and feed for the horses. They were wonderful neighbors.
Did Orrin then buy this land?
Yes, and got a...
I mean, he went out there and bought it, and then came back and then moved out.
Yes.
Yeah, I see.
That is, he made a down payment and got a, what did they call it, a state loan. You buy it, you pay the state.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know about that. What's the state of South Dakota would loan money?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. Do you remember any more about that system or how that worked?
I couldn't tell you exactly. Orrin went out there, and then he sent the papers back to me to sign.
I see.
And Grandpa Merritt took me to Salem to a lawyer, and I signed the papers. Anyway, the state or something had something to do with this.
I see.
And also the bank in Pequanna.
I see. Do you remember how much land was worth an acre then, Grandma?
I think Orrin was supposed to pay $8,000 for the 160 acres.
That's about $200 an acre, right? Or no, 160 divided by 8,000 is $20 an acre. No, that'd be $200 an acre. And this was in 1919, right?
Right.
I see.
And when we first went out there, we had good crops, but the price wasn't very good.
I see.
And then as the years got worse, the depression, and we had fairly good crops. Orrin had wonderful wheat in 31, and you couldn't get no price for it.
Well, how were the 20s in South Dakota?
Well, some of them must have been pretty good. We had, shall I say, a hill farm.
How was that?
There was a little draw come in from the, now let me see, I have to get this right because I'm kind of turned around when I think here and back there.
Yeah.
There was a little ravine come down through the pasture from the southwest. I'm right, this is west.
Right. Don't ask her, she wouldn't know.
And then there was a little ravine come down from the north, and this little ravine that came down from the north run into a dam in the house yard.
I see.
And there was a well below the dam. And as the years went by, this dam was filled in. You know, the dirt washed in.
The silt.
And Orrin built another dam farther down, near the hog pen, where he had the hogs. And then there was a dam in the pasture that this little ravine fed. And also, when they had hard rains, it took the dam out a couple of times.
I see.
And there was a big spillway there, too, that it should have got away, but it just didn't. And then this well by the house finally went dry, and Orrin had the well driller dig in 3 different places, and we didn't get water. We had to haul water then from the neighbors.
What year was this, do you remember?
Oh, I think it must have been in about 1930.
I see. Do you remember, did you own a car when you were out in the 1920s? Did you ever?
Yes, Orrin traded some cows to a neighbor for a Ford touring car.
I see. Do you remember
in
what year?
1925.
I see. And before, did a lot of people own cars then, or were horses still plentiful out there?
Well, lots of people drove horses, but there was all the ones that were better off had cars, you know.
But still a lot of people were driving horses?
Yes.
How far actually were you from Chamberlain, in what direction?
We were about 10 miles northwest of Puckwana, and about the same distance northeast from Chamberlain.
Oh, I see.
You couldn't tell by direct miles. Going to Puckwana, you angled across the school section.
I see.
And going to Chamberlain, you wound around the hills.
I see.
So it was hard to tell in miles.
Was that all settled out there? Everybody was farming? I mean, there were a lot of farmers out there and everything. Were there any ranchers on that side of the river?
Yes.
There were. How big were those ranches? Do you remember?
I really couldn't tell you.
I see. But I mean, they were doing nothing but raising cattle too, or were they farming?
Oh, I think most of them farmed. That is, unless they were too deep in the hills.
I see.
Down on the what they call bottom, Bruley Bottom.
How often did you get to Chamberlain in the 1920s?
Well, and that depended too. You know, they hauled corn to Chamberlain or Puckwana, and when the neighborhood shelled corn, they exchanged work, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And whoever was shelling corn, they hauled their surplus corn to Chamberlain or Puckwana. And one year, Orrin had blood poison.
How did that
in his
happen?
hand. He wanted to pick corn to that he'd just snap it to get a field cleared so he could put the cattle in. And there was quite a lot of smut in the corn that fall.
How do you mean smut, Grandma?
Don't you know what smut on corn is?
Was it rust of some kind?
It's smut. It's a growth comes out on the ears of corn, and as it dries, it's a black powder.
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean.
Wheat has smut in it too sometimes.
Right.
Well, anyway, Orrin come in from the field at noon, and he had just a little spot on his finger, just like a little pimple about the size of a pinhead. He went back out and picked in the afternoon, and his hand was so badly swelled that he couldn't use that to unload the corn in the evening. And we had a barn that he could back the wagon into, and so he just took one hand and the tine scoop and pulled this back and just unloaded it in the barn.
Now, did you go to a doctor with those things in those days?
The next morning.
Was there a doctor in Pacoima then?
Yes.
I see.
The next morning he had a German neighbor. They called him Old Doc. He acted like he didn't know much, but he was smarter than he'd let you know he was. And Orrin had Old Doc take him to Pacoima. And they lanced his hand, but by morning his fingers was spread out so bad. And the doctor lanced it. And then he was to sit by the cook stove and keep his hand in hot water with an antiseptic in it for 2 hours. And then he was to have his hand out of it for 2 hours. And Chuck wasn't a year old yet. So that would have been in the fall of 1919. And I put Chuck on the table and put pillows around him. And Orrin could use the one hand, you know, to kind of corral him. And we didn't have anything but wet cobs. This Old Doc had hauled us some cobs, and they were wet in the first place, and then we'd had the snow. And I would dig those cobs out of the snow and bring them in, and Orrin would keep enough in this trough in the front of the cook stove to keep them drying a little and pushing them down in.
I see.
And I done the chores. And then later on we had a neighbor come and haul in feed for the stock. We had several cows and horses. And then Orrin rode a mare to one of the neighbors to go to Pacoima to get coal. We'd had this snow in the meantime, see, and it was a deep snow. And he would ride this little mare until they got into such deep drifts that it was too much for her to make it with him on, and he'd get off and walk. And the neighbor was only about a half mile away that he was going to Pacoima with.
Where did you get mail in those days? Did you have to go to Pacoima?
No, there was what was called the stage, come from Chamberlain, and it stopped at a little store and post office. It was called Gross, on the way to Fort Thompson, and the mail was sorted. It come down our way at this little store. And then as the stage come back from Fort Thompson, it come around by our way. And we had a mailbox about a quarter of a mile from our house.
What kind of, was this an actual stage, or was it just a wagon with horses?
Well, it wasn't a stage. It was a half-breed Indian that carried the mail at first. And he just drove a team and I would say a spring wagon.
I see.
That's all I saw him drive. But later on, they carried it by truck.
Oh, I see. How were the roads in those days? Once again, were they just dirt roads? I mean, they weren't graded or anything yet then?
Yes, they were graded.
Oh, I see. How would they grade those?
With horses.
With horses and the metal, they pull these grader machines. I see.
Yes.
Did the county, did they tax you pretty heavy in those days, or?
I really don't know, but you know, a long time, way back when, they had what they called a poll tax. And this, they charged you tax and you worked it out on the road. That's the way you paid part of your taxes.
Oh, I see.
Was by working on the roads.
I see. They had that when you were out there yet then?
Yes.
Did Orrin go out and do that?
Yes.
Is that how, you don't remember how often he had to do that, or how much?
I think once a year.
Once a year for how long? One day?
I
or
really
you
don't know. I really
see.
don't know.
Dad used to do that.
Oh, is that here in this?
Yeah, they used to have poll tax, and that's the way they paid them. Was I don't know how.
Well, in his case, it probably wasn't taxes, it was probably just extra money. But they, you know.
Your dad?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, we're talking about paying off your tax bill. That's a different animal altogether.
And then before we came down here, in the It must have been the winter of 33. Orrin worked on the road, this, what did they call it, WPA?
Yeah.
In order to feed his stock and feed his family, because things had got so bad, the grasshoppers really, and the dry weather really took everything. And then his horses got the distemper, so he wasn't able to work them, but he did have one that he would ride to a neighbor's house, and the two neighbors would go together. And some places where they worked, the ground was froze so bad that they would have to put on 6 head of horses or 8 head of horses just to plow. And it was so cold and miserable, but that's how they worked too. And we got some commodities, you know, like...
Yeah. During the 20s, you say your crops were good most of the time during the 1920s,
yes.
But you weren't getting any money for... was this a common plight of all the farmers up there? I mean, of course, did they try to do anything politically? Were they, was there much political activity?
I don't think so, not in the country there.
You don't recall anybody getting so upset about that they wanted the federal government to do anything? What was the, did you think that there was any one group responsible for the low prices, or how did people feel about these low prices? Were they unhappy? Did they think it was the fault of some person or group, or?
You know, I really don't know. I really couldn't tell you.
I see. You know, you can read in a history book, you know, like in the 1870s, if something went bad, why they blamed the bankers, or they blamed the meat packers, or something.
Well, the bankers, the bank did go broke out there. You couldn't draw any money out, and we were fortunate because we didn't have but $10 in.
Was this in the 30s then?
I don't remember what year it was.
Well, during the 1920s then, did you look for things always to get better, Grandma? Or? We
always hoped.
I see, but I mean, was there any real indication that your life was getting better, you know, like you were getting your more cattle, or the weather was good all the time and it would stay good? Did you think things would get better? Someday you'd own a nicer house or a nicer car, things like that? Or what was your attitude in those days?
I don't think we dreamed about having a mansion or a fancy car.
Yeah, but I mean...
What we dreamed about was trying to get our place paid for, and we never did. We had to give it up.
That was your really... the focal point of much of your life then in those days, I see.
But there was one year that we sold 40 dozen eggs, 42 dozen eggs, I think it was, for 4 cents a dozen. And I've got proof in a book to show you.
You don't remember what year that was?
No, but I can look it up.
It was in the 20s, was it? Or was
I
this
don't
in the...
remember what year it was. It was, let me see. Yes, it would have had to have been in the 20s because it was after we had Harvey's.
I see. Now, you know, you can read in the history books today where the 1920s, it was a time of the standard of living was raising in the United States for the working class and so forth. But at the same time, things weren't raising for you out there farming. Were most farmers this way?
We needed water. We needed rain, just like they've needed it this year here. If we could have had plenty of water, that would have helped a lot.
I see. Did people, were they more religious? Because, you know, were they turning to God when all these things were going wrong for them? Do you remember?
I don't think so.
I mean, it wasn't like when everything was okay, but then all of a sudden if things went bad, they didn't turn to try to...
We lived in a neighborhood, they called it West Point, and the people, we didn't live right in that neighborhood, but we went to the schoolhouse where they had Sunday school. Sometimes they didn't have church. And the grandma of the neighborhood was the superintendent. And the kids, mostly her descendants, did their singing and had programs and all that. In the forenoon they went to Sunday school. In the afternoon they went to a ball game, from the littlest to the grandma. And when they had barn dances, it was the same thing. From the tiny babe to the grandma went to the barn dances. They were a community that took part in all the activities.
They helped each other a lot.
That's
then.
right.
Were you a midwife in those days, Grandma,
No.
already? Not yet?
No.
I see. Do you remember in the 20s, were there any radios up where you were?
Radios. There was a family by the name of Bob Brown that we used to go and listen to Hawaiian music.
Is that right? You don't remember what year that was,
No, I
do you?
don't remember what year it was.
I see. How big a radio was that, or did you have to use the earphones?
No, we didn't have to use earphones. It wasn't a very big radio, but it was nice and clear.
Oh, I see. You don't remember what stations, if Yankton?
No, I don't.
I see.
No.
Did you use mail order catalogs a lot in those days?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Quite a bit, did
Yes.
you? How would you send your money in, by check, or did you
By check.
By check,
Mm-hmm.
I see. Did people, would they prefer to buy out of a catalog, or did they prefer to go in and buy something?
Well, I think a lot of the people went to town. As I say, there was people there that were much better off than we were, had the money that could do those things.
Yeah.
The old timers that had a foothold there,
Yeah.
they could make it much better than those that were trying to get a foothold.
But I mean to say, did you buy then out of a catalog more of necessity than of choice? I mean, like today, people will still buy out of a catalog when they can go down to the store and buy the same thing. And they're choosing to buy out of a catalog. But in those days, people would buy out of a catalog because they had to, because prices were cheaper, or it's just that they couldn't get to town?
Well, I think it was a little more convenient to have the mailman bring our clothing, mostly, that we sent for.
I see. Did people when you were out there, did you travel much back to Salem at all to visit, or?
In 25, my mother had a stroke,
I see.
and it seems to me we had a neighbor boy take us back, or if we had the touring car at that time, Ed drove the car back. Ed Krebs, these Krebs that I talk about, he drove the car back. Orrin didn't drive it.
But I mean, there wasn't much visiting before that. Did you visit back and forth at all? I see.
And it isn't so far from Chamberlain to Salem.
Now you were on the Missouri River, so to speak. There.
Yes.
Were there any more Indians around that part of the country?
We live 3 miles from the Crow Creek Indian Reservation.
I see.
That was north of us.
And how did people get along with the Indians in those days?
Well, some of them very well. Some of the Indian boys played ball with the neighbor men.
I see. Did some people dislike Indians because they were Indians, or?
Oh, I think that's always been a problem among peoples everywhere.
But I mean, did the Indians ever come down and cause trouble amongst the people there, or did the people ever go up to the reservation and give the Indians a rough time, or try and take their land or anything, or?
No, I don't believe so. Orrin and some of the neighbor boys went up on the reservation and cut wood up there, and I believe the Indian man up there, I think his name was Pete Lycum, and they thought a lot of him.
I see.
And then there was a family by the name of Loudner that farmed, and the men in the neighborhood helped them when they farmed, change work with them, you know. And they were also ball players.
I see. But you never saw where they were giving Indians a bad time just because they were Indians personally. Did you ever see this happen?
No.
I see. Did you ever vote in any elections up there, Grandma?
No, I never did.
I see. Did most people just not bother, or did a lot of people vote? Or don't?
Oh, I think I think a lot of people voted, had their elections in the schoolhouses, you know.
I see. Now, when your children started school up there in South Dakota, when you were by Chamberlain there, were the schools better by that time than what they were when you had gone, or were they about the same?
Well, they built a schoolhouse. Our kids went to school the first season that they had this new schoolhouse. And they had here's pictures of the Chamberlain bridges.
Oh yeah, that's the way it looks today. Well, here it is when it was a single span, yeah. Had a ferry boat near there.
Well, I think this is a new bridge.
Yeah, that's right. This is the way it looks now.
And that's Main Street in Chamberlain.
Yeah, hasn't changed that much.
Okay.
Has it?
And that's a beautiful place in Chamberlain. That's rocks.
Oh yeah.
This is a straight shot off the bridge.
Yep.
Here is the east end of our house out at Chamberlain. This is the west end, and that's the east end. But we didn't have those trees when we were there. This was taken later.
Oh, I
There
see.
was 3 trees out here, and the grasshoppers ate the leaves off when we were there, killed the trees. And those were planted by the folks that lived there after we did. Here is the schoolhouse the kids went to.
I see.
And Harvey went the first term there.
Of course, you didn't have electricity when you were up there, did you?
Electricity?
Yeah.
No.
Did you burn kerosene lamps then, did you? Or
Yes.
did you stay up late at night, or did people go to bed early in those days, or?
Well, that depended. Just in the wintertime, all neighbors used to play cards,
I see.
you know.
But I mean, you'd visit back and forth a little bit.
Oh, yes.
I see.
Yeah, that's when we first went to Chamberlain.
So, what year did the bad weather and grasshoppers really start up there then?
Well, let me see. It must have been in 32 or 33. Because we came down here in 34, and that year there was no hopes whatever, and that wasn't just grasshoppers, it was dry, where Orrin had planted grain, where he had disc. The wind just blew the topsoil right off. You could see the marks of the disc in the hard ground. And the corn didn't even get big enough it would make good ensilage at all. And before that, we had made, they had cut the grain and then mowed the stubble grounds later on that had growed up to thistles for feed for the stock, which was terribly hard on the horses. Here's some more of that. Maybe you can figure out what they are.
But you say this didn't happen until the 30s then, or 31?
I think in 31 or 32. I believe in 31 was the year that Orrin had a very good wheat crop.
I see.
But he didn't get much for them. There's a thumb on it, baby.
And then progressively it just got worse and
Got
worse
worse.
and worse.
And if we'd had moisture, that was the great trouble of it all.
I see. And of course you owed a mortgage on the farm.
Yes.
And what happened? You finally just decided.
You just had to turn it back to the government.
I see. You just packed up, came back down here to Iowa.
Yes.
Was the same thing happening to everybody else around there then too?
No, I don't think so. As I say, the old timers, the ones that had a foothold, and their relatives. Now, I was amazed when we went back on a visit how far some of those people had come, what they owned. But you know, with now like us, the man that bought our place bought it for $500.
The whole thing for
$500. If we could have just hung on and had any hope of it ever raining and getting a crop, It would have made a lot of difference.
Do you know when things began to get better up there then?
Oh, yes.
How long did it take though, really?
I really don't know because we didn't go back for
I
several years.
I see. But it was a matter of, if you had owned your farm outright, you probably could have hung on then. I see.
We would have tried to get by some way, but then we were so deeply in debt we couldn't.
I see. Were there many newcomers like you out there that the same thing had happened to you, or were most of the people had been there for a long time?
Well, Krebses hadn't been there too many years before we were there. They were the people that had went from Salem.
Mm-hmm.
But they, I think they had the money that had paid off their place,
Oh,
so I believe it was paid off.
I see. Well, I can't think of anything more to ask about now. Do you think anything about it? You're looking at pictures, and that don't go on the paper cutter.
I can't believe how these people look like.
Like pioneers? In the early days, when you can remember, Grandma, was there any wild west out there anymore? I mean,
No,
was that all gone by the time you can remember?
people were amazed. My father's sisters from Leon, Iowa, came to visit him in 1926. He was ill at the time, and 1928, I should say, instead of 19. He was ill at the time, and they hadn't seen him for 30 years, and they thought we lived out in a wild country. They couldn't believe the buildings and things.
But I mean,
the schools
you don't ever, I mean, you personally, from when you were a little girl or anything, I mean, like when you went to Kansas or anything, did you ever see cowboys wearing pistols or anything like that? No, that was all gone already.
We saw cowboys, but then I don't recall. If they wore pistols, it was to shoot rattlesnakes.
Yeah, but I mean, they weren't even doing that.
There were no roughhouse where we were, any of that.
I see. Do you remember the first time you saw an airplane in South Dakota?
Oh, goodness. No, I really don't. But I have a picture somewhere of the first airplane that they had at the fair. They used to have county fair at Salem. And it was one of those with the wings, and then it looked like just sticks down.
Oh, yeah.
That was, I didn't see that, but it was at the fair.
I see.
And my brother-in-law got a picture of it.
How often, when you lived by Chamberlain there, how often did you actually get into Chamberlain?
Not very often.
I see. I mean, once or twice a year?
Orrin, of course, had to go because we had cream to sell and eggs to sell. But when we first went out there, the kids were little, you know, and if I rode in the wagon and went with them, they were so cross the next day that it wasn't worth the trouble to go. And Orrin could do a good job of getting the things we needed or wanted, or what we had to have, should I say.
I see. Did you make much, was this an important part of your income, the selling eggs and cream and all
cream. In fact, that's what Orrin bought his machinery with when we first went out there.
I see.
We charged our groceries, and we had 6 cows, separated the milk and sold the cream, and we had a nice lot of chickens.
I see.
And
Did you help? Hogs. Were you tied down mostly in the house and baking and cooking and taking care of the children, or did you help Orrin?
I helped Orrin. We took our kids along with us.
I see. What would you do with them when you took them out in the field? Just lay in there, or did you put them in the wagon, or?
When they were little, we put them in the wagon. We had a big box, and we put that in the front of the wagon, set the kids in there, set one way and one the other so they had room. And then we'd try to throw the corn so we wouldn't hit the kids. And then, of course, later on, when they could run, why, they were turned loose and they run in the cornfield.
I see.
Sometimes we went to the cornfield with heated bricks for them to stand on to keep warm.
I see. were there any wild animals around there?
Coyotes.
Coyotes? What about rattlesnakes? Were they all gone already? Or?
No, there were some rattlesnakes there.
Did anyone ever get bit by them, do you know?
I don't think so. I killed one day and didn't know it was a rattlesnake.
Oh, where was that? Around the farmyard? Or?
Yes. Our house was about as near the center of the farm as it could be. And west of the house, Orrin had listed. And Chuck and Elsie were going to go to the mailbox, and they were just hopping these onto the ridges, you know. And there was a snake in the ditch. And they come running back to the house and told me there was a snake. And I got the hole and killed it. And it didn't have no rattles on it.
Oh, it was just a baby then?
No, it was a big one. But it had just swallowed a ground squirrel or something. Wasn't hungry. Didn't show any fight at all. And when we come, I had put it on a hole, that is, picked it up with a hole and took it out where the men folks were listening to find out what kind of a snake it was. And it was one of those diamondback cottonwood snakes.
Cottonmouth or something?
No, cottonwood snake. There's two different kinds of rattlesnakes.
I see.
And when the story was really told, there had been a neighbor man had thought he killed this snake and took the rattles off from it over by our mailbox. That had been several days before. And that rattlesnake had come down the Lister ditch and was there in front of our house.
When you left up there in South Dakota, did you see that there was going to ever be a better time, or were things really so black that you thought they'd probably stay that way forever and ever?
Well, we didn't see how in the world we could keep on there. You see, Orrin worked on this WPA, and the hardest thing in my life that I ever had to do was to have the kids say, Mama, how many pieces of this can I have, or how many spoonfuls of that can I have?
I see.
That wasn't just the things that we could have, because we always had our cows, always had milk products and eggs and our meat, but it would be the extra things.
Yeah.
And
but I
then
mean,
to go,
say, I mean, you were finally forced to leave, but I mean, did you ever see that? Did you ever think things, I mean, did you know that things were bad throughout the country too, or did you just, I mean, did you look at it more on a personal, or was it so personal that you couldn't see that other people were having problems throughout the country either?
well, the year that, that must have been in 33, Orrin come down here and worked for his brother-in-law south of Ottawa, picked corn for his brother-in-law and his brother, Park and Park's brother, come and pick corn so that we could see our way through. Well, when he come back, he had the old Ford loaded down with canned things that his mother and Beulah had sent back, and popcorn and walnuts and things like that we got through the winter. And then in the spring, we moved down to a place, it was a little over a mile. It wasn't a mile to the actual farm ground, but down to the buildings.
I see.
But there was where, when he put the crop in, the wind just simply blowed it out of the ground. And what little corn there was wouldn't even make good fodder. So we came down here the 27th of July, a terrible hot day. That is, Orrin and Elsie and Harvey and I. And Chuck stayed for another day or two to come with the truck that was bringing the horses and the furniture.
I see.
And then they took the livestock out to Floyd Merritt's out west of town here.
Were you bitter? Were you really bitter when this happened, or was it? Did you kind of accept this as just a natural course of events, as life?
Well, Orrin and I had always been poor kids, shall I say. And it wasn't as bad for us as if we'd been up the ladder farther and had to come back down.
I see. So, I mean, you really didn't blame anybody or the government or...
No, it was just, if we'd had the rain, I think we could have made it.
I see. Were other people that were being forced out there, were they more bitter, do you know? Or,
No, I think that was a neighborhood that accepted things as they come.
I see.
Because some of them had been old-timers. They were old-timers themselves, and then their parents had been there and went through hard times as pioneers, you know.
I see. No, it's very interesting to find out what, like today, people, I think, wouldn't accept things like that.
I think they tried to make the best of things and were, happy, good neighbors. Helped each other whenever they could. There was a neighbor that lived a mile north and about a mile west and about a quarter of a mile north, that lent us cows to milk. He had lots of cattle and would let us have cows to milk, let Orrin have horses to work, not because Orrin needed them really, but then he wanted his horses, they raised horses, and he wanted these colts to be broke. Orrin had 3 of his horses at one time, and we had 2 of his cows several different times. And if one person was going to butcher a beef and you couldn't buy a quarter of beef, then they'd wait till you had something that you could butcher and they'd trade, They were wonderful people, and if somebody had a good garden and more than they needed, they'd share with you.
Did the federal government have any government programs in those days?
They had that,
for farmers?
what was it, feed and seed?
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah.
But you had to pay that off.
Yeah, it
We
was
were
just a loan, yeah.
We paid the last of that off after we lived down here.
I see. When had you borrowed on that for the first time?
I couldn't tell you.
I see.
Orrin always done the business end of things.
Were things better here in this part of Iowa, by this Monona County, Iowa? Were things better here than they were up there?
Oh yes, much better.
They were having more rain down here?
When we came down here the first time in 1925, I think it rained every night we were here. Just terrible thunder and lightning. And they had a mammoth crop out east here, wheat crop. And farmers were having a terrible time to get that harvested.
But you never experienced this. Was there ever too much rain in South Dakota?
Well, I suppose some years, yes.
But
in the first years my folks lived there, there used to be lots of little pond holes out through the fields that they weren't able to farm at all. And one year I can remember, my folks didn't, but the Merritts did, had I think Orrin said it was a beer barrel fixed on some way so it would help hold the weight of the bull wheel up, if you know what a bull wheel on a binder is. Well, it's the big wheel that runs the whole thing.
I see. It was that wet, they had to hold it down.
Yes, they had to relieve that so it didn't sink in and get stuck. Yes, there was times it was too much water.
When you bought this land out there by Chamberlain in 1919, had there been a history of this being good land?
Well, I suppose so, because there were successful people out there.
How long had Krebs lived there before Grandpa went out to look?
How far away?
How long had Krebs, wasn't it Krebs?
Yeah.
They lived there.
I don't know if they had been there a couple of years.
Is there anything we didn't cover that you'd want to mention, Grandma, about what life was like up in the Dakotas during this early 1900s?
Well, I'm sorry I don't have the dates.
Oh no, I think things it went very well. Well, the dates I can look up in history books, say, or in records and stuff. But I'm more after the general attitude of what went on and how people reacted and that kind of thing, Like by the time you moved down, had they paved any roads in South Dakota yet?
I don't believe so, unless it was near the towns.
I see. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that...
I don't think there was any paved roads out in the country.
I see. Did you ever go back? How soon did you go back to South Dakota after you had left? When was the first time you went back?
I think in 58.
It was, over 20 years then before you went back. I see. Have you, any relatives living up there yet, in South Dakota?
Yes, it's around Salem.
Oh.
Orrin's brother and wife live in the town of Salem.
How old is he now?
He was 76 in August.
I see. Had he farmed up there?
Yes, he was a farmer.
He
but
farmed all that time around?
Yes.
I see.
And he's retired now. I think they've lived in town several years, but he still owns a farm south of Salem.
Have you any of your relatives up in South Dakota?
My sister's son, Earl McCullough, lives on a farm east of Salem.
I see.
And let's see, yeah, I think that's all in South Dakota.
And Louis in North Dakota, right?
Yes. Oh, no, I have some nieces at Watertown in South Dakota.
I see.
I have 1, 2, 3 nieces in Watertown and one in Lake Norden, and of course their children.
But now is that from
Aunt Susie's children.
her son? What was the situation from Woodlawn?
But in general, though, in South Dakota, in those days, did you think you had things rough in those days?
I think
You know, when you were a child and growing up and that.
I think we more or less accepted it. I don't know. As I say, Orrin's folks and my folks were always poor. They had to work for a living. Orrin's mother used to take in washings and ironings and clean house.
Well,
My mother never done that.
I see. Yeah. Well, I think we've covered just about everything that I can think of.
Well, I'd like to talk about a little bit about now.
Get over there, sorry.
Like when you had your children, who was there? I mean, you always had them at home, didn't you?
You
You had your children at home.
Yeah.
I mean, babies.
Mm-hmm.
When you had them at home. Was there just Grandpa, or did some lady come, or?
Mother Merritt and the doctor.
Would come but then would someone stay with you for a while, or?
Orrin's mother stayed with me until I was able to get up and around.
Now, didn't you act as sort of, I don't know if you were actually what you call midwife, but you used to come and stay with women too, didn't you? Somewhere along the line?
Here, yes. With down here, but not in the coast.
But were you actually a midwife, or did you just
No.
help after the doctor?
No,
delivered?
there was always a doctor.
When in South Dakota, did a lot of babies die at birth? Do you remember, Grandma?
I don't think so.
Did people tend to have big families in those days too, or?
Yes, some of our neighbors had as much as 10 or 12 children. And I really don't think there was as much sickness or death among children as there are now.
Yeah, take your picture.
Chuck was sick a lot when he was little, wasn't he?
Well, he had that bronchitis, but he wasn't
Because he had,
sick at all.
what, not saddle sores, but carbuncles or something too, so he couldn't be outside.
Oh, yes, he had some carbuncles. And we had a carbuncle. We had some boils one time. But when he had the big carbuncle, well, he was in South Dakota too, because we were at Daly's then, when he got it first. But Dr. Stouch lanced it down here.
No, he was okay.
Oh, when Elsie was born, Orrin went to John McCullough's. They had a telephone.
Would it be this
Yeah.
crank on the wall?
And we had a telephone when Harvey was born. And had that put in just, well, before Harvey was born, because he would be gone making hay and harvesting and things like that. And we had the telephone put in so I could call.
Well, I think we'll